from the time I was 17 until I finished college and then finished seminary. In 1987, I drove a 1972 Ford Pinto. It was lime green, and it had white, made to look like leather interior. Besides being dangerous and ugly, it was also quirky. It had some electrical quirks. If I turned on the headlights, it always registered full of gas. That created some trouble for me. But the AM radio worked great. It didn't have an FM radio. I had only AM radio, which means when I was traveling from college in Macon back up to Atlanta in rural middle Georgia, about all I could pick up late at night was really bad preaching. That's what's on late night AM radio. And in that era, it seemed like everyone with a late night AM broadcast was interested in unpacking all of the mysteries of the book of Revelation for those of us stuck in a Pinto late at night. The country preacher would say through the crackling AM radio, "The beast that was like a leopard with feet like the feet of a bear and mouth like a lion, well, that's obviously modern day Iran." And the reference in chapter 4 of Revelation, except he usually said Revelations, that reference is obviously to President Reagan. Even before I went to seminary, I knew instinctively that this was really bad biblical interpretation. I just didn't have a language for what made it so bad. I finally did get to seminary and found out what made it so bad. Part of responsible biblical interpretation is giving attention to what the scholars call form criticism. That is, what is the literary form it's written in? The form matters. There's a difference between how we read a love letter and how we read directions for putting together a Barbie dream house. Those are different forms. There's a difference between how we read a parable and a proverb. We extract meaning from a biblical passage in part by the form it's written in. We have in Psalms this evocative poetry, which is very different from the clear red-lettered commands of Jesus. Well, the form matters, and today's story is in the form of allegory. That is, the settings, the references, the figures in the story all have a direct symbolic reference. See, the late night AM radio preachers were making allegory where there was none. They were making connections that aren't there, giving everything in the story some specific value. Like they would say, the red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, well, that's China. You know that's China because you've been to Chinese restaurants and seen red dragons, just stuff like that. But today's story is allegory. We can responsibly attach symbolic values inside this big, oversized story. And like so many biblical stories, today's involves a party. I had not really noticed this theme until recently. I was reading Fleming Rutledge, and she points out that God apparently loves parties. They're all over the Bible. Book of Exodus, Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and say, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may have a feast to me in the wilderness." Party. Then all along, all the way to Revelation 19:9, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. It'd be a good seminary paper for somebody to just research how many parties show up in the Bible. God apparently loves a party. Kill the fatted calf. My prodigal son is home. But then and now, a family's biggest party is usually a wedding. The great marriage feast where all of the friends and family drive in from all over to be a part of the great big family celebration. In August 2012, my daughter Haley married Chris, and we had a great big marriage feast and celebration. Family drove in from Nashville. It was great. Sometime next year, we're going to have a much smaller family celebration when I celebrate paying off the feast that was in 2011. So Jesus is telling a story that's grounded in the experience of the listener, because they know and we know that the wedding is the big family blowout celebration. But in this story, that's where the realism stops. As is typical of the storytelling of Jesus, almost everything else in this story is exaggerated and oversized. It might help to remember where Jesus is standing when he tells this story. He's just arrived into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, Palm Sunday. Since then, he has turned over the tables of the money changers. The religious leaders have confronted him, asking by whose authority he does the things he does. Jesus then tells a few parables where the religious elite don't fare very well. So when Jesus starts into this story about invited guests who will not come to the wedding banquet, he's talking to those who would have been considered the most important people in the kingdom of Israel, those whose names would have been atop any king's guest list, but they would not come. So he sent other servants saying, "Tell those who were invited, I've prepared dinner, the oxen, fat calves are killed, everything's ready, come to the marriage feast." But they made light of it. I got stuff to do. That's on bowling night. I think there's a new episode of This Is Us on that night. We were going to buy our vacuum cleaner bags, something. But Jesus tells big, exaggerated stories. And so the king's servants are seized, mistreated, even killed. And who did all of this violence? Well, the first listeners are the religious leaders, and they understand allegory. They get that he's talking about them. Well, when the smoke clears, the king says to his servants, "The wedding is ready, but those who were invited are not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets, invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet." And they did. Those slaves went out into the streets, gathered everyone they found, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests, with people who were both good and bad. That part makes us squirm a little. Church on Sunday morning. Both good and bad would suggest that getting into the king's party is not so much about being good enough, but as Miss Kelly said, it's about accepting the invitation. Everyone is a big invitation list. I probably would have not invited everyone. That's a big list. There's some people I just don't want to do the electric slide with at a wedding reception. But not this king. He sends servants out to talk to everybody, everyone who will come. Anybody who thinks a party with free food and drink sounds like a good time, invite them all. And apparently, that includes both good people and bad people. And God is going to have this party whether you and I choose to attend or not, because God apparently loves a party. So let's imagine for a moment, as some people do, that Jesus is really talking about who gets into heaven. At first, it was those who had earned God's favor, the entitled ones, God's chosen people. And chosen and entitled is a good place to be. But by the end of this story, it is everybody who will come, both good and bad. Getting into heaven, then, is not a matter of being good enough or working hard enough or even signing up to help with trunk or treat this Wednesday. That will not get you into heaven. It will put you in Miss Kelly's favor, however. Getting into the great banquet is a matter of accepting God's invitation. To put it theologically, it's about grace. You've probably heard us sing songs about it. This is what the grace is what Paul gets so excited about when he's writing in his letters. Because after years and years of trying to earn his salvation, God shows Paul that we are saved by grace through faith and not by our works. So if we can receive it, if we can believe that in Jesus Christ, God has sent every person on earth an invitation, and that if we accept that invitation and say, yes, I will come to the party, then we're in. It's a story of God's grace. It's the great good news of the gospel story. The King has thrown a party. And regardless of your past, regardless of who you are, you have been invited to the party of the King. And oh, how I wish Jesus had just ended the story right there. It would have been such a good place to end the story if it had just ended with the high notes of a good wedding party, with tinkling glasses and cutting the cake and the daddy-daughter dance. It would have been great. But Jesus doesn't end the allegory there. The party's underway. Everybody's having a great time. It's a perfect party. There's no A-list or B-list. There's no preferred seating. There's no head table. The band is great. They're not too loud. Everybody has a dance partner, and everybody knows all the words to every song that's playing. Nobody's had too much to drink. There's nobody in line. Anytime you want to go up and get those little mini crab cakes, there's not even a line. The little shrimp and grits served in the martini glasses, just go right up. Everybody's dancing, singing with the band, and nobody has requested that the band play Macarena. It's great. It's a great party, a perfect wedding festival. The King is walking around basking and greeting, and he runs into a guy who's not dressed appropriately. And the King says, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?" And he was speechless. Then the King said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot, throw him into outer darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Many are called, few are chosen." Now, come on. The guy didn't know there was going to be a wedding till just a little while ago. How's the King going to punish him so harshly for being dressed inappropriately when he just found out about the wedding? He didn't know he was invited. Remember? The servants went out and got people, guys playing checkers at the Cracker Barrel. Come on. Women who were at the laundromat, come on, the King's throwing a party. He went downtown, found teenagers sitting on the hoods of cars, smoking cigarettes, and said to them, "Are you interested in going to a party?" They said, "Yeah." Went to the immigration office. They went into midtown bars, stopped guys laying asphalt and said, "The King's throwing a party and you're invited, come on." So how could this guy be expected to be dressed correctly? But there's another kind of entitlement that the king hates as much as he hates the first kind. And I can't improve on how Barbara Brown Taylor describes the guy who's not wearing a wedding robe. This is what she says. But like the underdressed guest, some of us have rolled in here without thinking much about it. We've showed up with our spiritual shirt tails hanging out, lining up at the buffet table as if no one could see the ways in which we too have refused to change. Refusing to surrender our fears and resentments, refusing to share our wealth, refusing to respect the dignity of every human being. These are the old clothes we wear to the king's banquet, the clothes we prefer to the wedding robe of new life. And they are as painful to him as a bride dressed in black. The king has invited everybody to the party, but he's not looking for warm bodies. He wants people who are invited to be serious about honoring his son. He was enraged by a group of entitled people who didn't take him up on the invitation, but he was also enraged by a wedding guest who came to a party and acted entitled. Acted entitled after he got there, grazing the buffet, filling up again at the champagne fountain, dancing the night away without any regard for what was expected of him when he showed up to the party. We have all been invited to the party, but the king is enraged by those who are not serious about giving honor to his son when they get there. I'll leave it to you to figure out what this has to do with stewardship season.